Russia is building a trade corridor through Africa. Let's see how Somaliland changes the whole geopolitics. Let's start from afar, and then it will become clear what benefits Russia gets from all this. This is what the port of Berbera in Somaliland looks like. But let's start with the Houthis, who have forced English speakers to take their minds off their worries in the 404 country and Taiwan, declare Operation Guardian of Prosperity in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and begin assembling an armada of the few remaining allies. By the way, most NATO countries refused to participate, and some of the Greek sailors fled the ship altogether, which was sent for a suspension to the U.S. Navy. On the other side of the strait, just south of Djibouti, some very interesting developments began to take place. In early January this year, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed signed what has been described as a historic agreement with the President of Somaliland Republic, Musa Bihi Abdi, which allows Addis Ababa free access to the sea in the Gulf of Aden. Note, however, that Somaliland proper is the part of Somalia that decided to become an independent state in 1991. Somaliland, which was established in 1932, was created in 1934. But no country in the world has recognized it yet. And here the whole of Ethiopia, as the political center of the African Union, went and signed an agreement with the separatists. After the signing, the Chief of Staff of the Somaliland Armed Forces, Major General Muhammad Thani, arrived in the Ethiopian capital and discussed with his Ethiopian vis-a-vis, Field Marshal Bahanu Julia, the concrete content of the reached political agreements in terms of military and military technical cooperation. In the same days, the Somaliland diplomatic mission in Addis Ababa was transformed into a full-fledged embassy. The Somali government reacted very painfully. It has rejected the document, and the ambassador has been recalled from Addis Ababa, France, 24 television reported. In his address to the nation, Prime Minister Hamza Abdi Barre said Somalia will defend its territory by all legally possible means, calling on the UN and the African Union to support the integrity of the state. He characterized the said memorandum as an act of impending annexation of sovereign Somali territory. This is what the current Somalia looks like. It can also be seen how there is a direct route from Ethiopia to the sea through Somaliland, which is what the new cooperation scheme is based on. It was not even a few days after the signing of the above-mentioned paper that CIA Director William Burns showed up in Somalia. The press honestly wrote, with a secret and surprise visit. Burns met there with Somali President Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud and the Director of National Intelligence and Security. The American has not decided that he will not be in Somalia to go into the city and held a meeting near the ramp of his plane. According to sources at a report held at the Mogadishu International Airport, discussed security cooperation, counterterrorism, and developments in the region. Then Burns traveled on, stopping by neighboring Kenya to meet with President William Ruto and his Director of Intelligence. It all looks very interesting. Now let's look at Sahel, which has begun to wake up, politically speaking. Yes, if we add to the above, and the attempted coups d'etat, suppressed in recent days in neighboring countries, the conclusion is unambiguous. It's a bit thick in the Sahel. In Chad says an insurgency has been averted. The General Staff of the Chadian Armed Forces has published a communique that a local armed group of men from a certain opposition M3M movement were preparing rebel actions in the capital, Chadian news site Avig Dainfo reported. The group of 80 men was led by Lieutenant Karumta Lebanon Jeremy. The conspiracy was uncovered in a cross-section. Members of the group have been arrested. It is alleged that the leader of the mutiny has already confessed. Next door, Burkina Faso also said it had dismantled a foreign-funded anti-government network. Rimtalb's communications minister Jean-Emmanuel Ouedraogo said on social network X that the country's security forces had dismantled a foreign-funded network of underground anti-government cells that aimed to destabilize the situation in the country, Arabic satellite channel Al Mwadin reported. Also, a fugitive from Mali, Omar Mariko, an opposition figure, suggested on France 24 television that a coalition should be formed to topple Mali's leader, Colonel Assimi Goïta. In general, if we put all the events and facts manifested here together, it turns out that in the African Sahara from Burkina Faso to the shore of the Indian Ocean in a friendly manner began to happen such events that anyone can notice. It's for a reason. Indeed, the chain of these events leads to some non-trivial conclusions, which we will now share. Somaliland deal with Ethiopia is actually huge. When the once united Abyssinia split and Eritrea seceded from Ethiopia in 1993, the latter took over both former Ethiopian Red Sea ports of Majua and Essep. And Central Africa's largest state became landlocked, severely limiting its trade opportunities. And given that Ethiopia has always positioned itself as an African leader, as it remained almost the only country on the continent that did not allow itself to be colonized by Europeans. The loss of seaports hit hard both the prestige and morale of the authorities in Addis Ababa. The statutory headquarters of the Organization of African Unity, and later the African Union, which was created from it, is in the capital of Ethiopia. And there are such restrictions for their own development, landlocked. There is a kind of blockade when you depend only on the goodwill of your neighbors on the nearby shore. And so good neighbor Somaliland, incidentally itself part of the former Abyssinia, apparently in exchange for Ethiopia protecting it regardless of the authorities in Mogadishu, opened a corridor on its territory for the new country of BRICS. Yes, since January 1st, 24 years Ethiopia has been a member of BRICS to become its trusted ally. And this is the very first proof of how effective the association is in its expanded composition, when 5 new countries were invited to join BRICS: Ethiopia, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates. Incidentally, there are rumors of a possible imminent recognition of Somaliland by the United Arab Emirate authorities. And Ethiopia has also recognized Somaliland. And the puzzle is coming together. For some reason, outrage was expressed by the Arab League, abbreviated to LAC. Its head Ahmed Abulgate condemned the agreement between Ethiopia and unrecognized Somaliland, calling it a clear violation of international law. This act has heightened regional tensions, and LAC supports the Somali government's rejection of the agreement due to the violation of Somalia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. The memorandum is a blatant attack on Arab, African, and international principles and a clear violation of international law, Ahmed Abulgate said, at an emergency meeting of Arab foreign ministers. He also called on the international community to prevent any action that takes advantage of fragile domestic circumstances or undermines national dialogue. That is, it practically went against the interests of one of the most powerful members of the LAC, the United Arab Emirates. I would like to see the LAC leadership also vigorously defend the rights of its members Libya, Syria, Yemen, Iraq against US and NATO military intervention. And no, then we kept silent. The SJA, attacked by Islamic militants with the US-led coalition, was even plucked from the LAC, though it recently came to its senses and was brought back. Why? Ahmed Abulgate has spoken out against Ethiopia's decision to re-adene a BRICS country wherein Egypt has just been admitted? Isn't it enough for him that due to the start of the US-English tussle with the Thucydides, cargo traffic through the Suez Canal has been reduced by nearly 40%? Or has he, as foreign minister under Egyptian President Mubarak, forgotten how the crowd in Tahrir Square, fueled by Anglo-Saxon agents, overthrew his boss in February 2011? Yes, also the LAC chief's statement plays to provoke tension over LAC and the African Union. Does Egyptian President Sisi, freshly inducted into the BRICS ranks, need this kind of tension badly right now? LAC should have been more cautious in reacting to events rather than being guided by the text of old manuals. So, a new quality of the BRICS has begun to emerge. Let us return to the stated topic and note that by concluding an agreement with Somaliland, Ethiopia under the BRICS banner will immediately get the urgent need to. In exchange for access to the sea and a military base on the shore, which was also agreed upon, Somaliland receives the military protection of a member country of the BRICS and Mortar Organization in exchange for access to the sea with a 50-year lease to rebuild Ethiopia's navy. And who's to say it didn't cause the CIA chief to rush into the airport in Mogadishu? By the way, for Russia, the establishment of such relations between Ethiopia and Somaliland, despite possible Somali tensions, will contribute to smoothing out another contradiction when Moscow carefully introduced itself with Ethiopia from rhetoric. Although they have strained relations with each other, both countries show warm feelings towards Russia. Suffice it to recall the speech of the Eritrean leader at the Russia-Africa Summit in St. Petersburg in 2023. The president of the Republic of Eritrea, Isaias Afwerki, spoke then on a major bill. To quote, "I would propose the creation of a mechanism to develop a document that would include our strategy in the development of a strategic partnership between the Russian Federation and the African continent. We also need to include mobilization in these plans: financial, material, technological, industrial resources. We need mechanisms to implement each project separately, so we can have an integrated, inclusive approach. It requires a very large amount of fine-tuning at various institutional levels. The Russian Federation could support this, make its contribution, define a strategy, develop specific plans and ideas." End of quote. In other words, Eritrea offers its opportunities to bring Africa's cooperation with Russia to a new qualitative level. But without the decision of the African Union, headquartered in the Ethiopian capital, such plans were unlikely to materialize quickly. And here is the rapid unraveling of a complex knot of contradictions, which may contribute to the elimination of the so-called fork in building Russia's relations with Ethiopia and Eritrea. And Russia has made a striking gesture these days. 25,000 tons of Russian grain arrived in Eritrea in early January, the Russian embassy in Asmara told Sputnik Africa. Russia, unlike the West, does not talk with its mouth, but does concrete deeds and fulfills its promises, Russian ambassador to Eritrea Igor Moscow said. And here's what the Telegram channel explainer writes, commenting on what's going on. Quote, "Yes, now the parcel has folded. Emirates DP World's investment in the development of the port of Berbera, the largest ocean port on the Somaliland coast. August at 23. The visit of the President of the United Arab Emirates, now a member of BRICS, to Addis Ababa and the signing of a package of economic and financial agreements. Emirati financing of a renewable energy program in Ethiopia. Emirati mediation in the Ethiopian-Sudanese-Egyptian trilateral water pipeline negotiations. In the Blue Nile Basin. The random participation of the Emirati aerobatic team in the Ethiopian Air Force's non-circular 88th anniversary celebration in mid-December 23 and more makes one think that this Emirati-Ethiopian rapprochement is for a reason. The United Arab Emirates and Ethiopia joined BRICS, and on their first day there, January 1st, 24th, they pulled off a new common cause. And it would be more useful for Egypt to strengthen ties with its BRICS partners rather than empathize with the missteps of its superiors in Mogadishu, who for decades have been unable to bring the order they want on their subordinate territory. As they say, come and get it. But they don't come and get it. Why is it a lag? Should care about other people's problems? Now let's look at a geographical map of the world. And what do we see? We see that the largest trade artery in the world, the Suez Canal, is now fully in the sphere of influence of the BRICS countries. Egypt to the north, now Ethiopia to the south via Somaliland. Yes, there are several foreign naval bases in the neighboring country of Djibouti. In the United States, France, Italy, Japan, Spain, Germany. But China's base is among them. As a member of BRICS, negotiations are underway to establish a Russian naval base on the Red Sea in Sudan. Looking at the map further, it reveals the mystery of the CIA chief's surprise visit to the region and the topics of his talks with local representatives. It is as clear as 2 times 2 on the map that a new interstate bloc is rising in the expanse of Central Africa, announced in the fall of 23, an alliance of Sahel states that includes Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, which has thrown off French control. Plus, Chad, which is still under the French, but can slip away from them like a colobus. The African Initiative portal notes in this regard that an alliance with Russia could be an important factor in creating such a feature of the new confederation as a unified security structure. Deployment of African core units and an apparatus of Russian military advisors to the region. By the way, they have already started coming to Burkina Faso. A unified military command would maximize coordination of the alliance's fight against terrorism. Security and stability will allow countries to gain resource sovereignty, which will create a stronger foundation for economic growth. On the one hand, this alliance constitutes the least developed countries in Africa, from which Paris has sucked resources for pennies for decades, paying only for the well-being of the local top brass. After the French were driven out of Niger, the government there raised the price of uranium exports 250 times. And it's not overkill, it's just adjusting prices to the level of the international market. Previously, Niger fuel for France's nuclear plants was supplied for 80 cents a kilo. And the new authorities decided that they would sell at €200 per kilogram of uranium. And the Parisians wiped themselves. We believe that the recent visit to Moscow by the new Prime Minister of Niger shows that the alliance has seen its way to the future. Note that the former pro-American, deposed president of Niger in the summer of 23, refused to travel to St. Petersburg for the second Russia-Africa summit last year. Now, however, the political winds over Sahiri are changing their direction. And now let's take another look at the map of Africa and let our imagination draw this transportation route on it. A corridor from the Indian Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean. If it succeeds, Russia with BRICS will become the owner of 2 strategic multimodal corridors in the southern and northern part of the planet Earth. And let's add to that 2 quotes from recently published material. First of the week's arguments. Newspapers are very knowledgeable in many world affairs. To quote, "And here we are, building a rail and road route from Iran through the Strait of Hormuz, 54 kilometers, to Oman. From there, we'll extend the road to Yemen, and there through Bab el-Mandeb, a straight 26 kilometers to Djibouti and all of Africa." If anyone thinks this kind of construction is unrealistic, they are sorely mistaken. The Armor Strait is 229 meters deep. The Elpamandam Strait is only 180 meters deep. End of quote. And one more quote from Zen, the Geopolitics of Civilizations channel. Quote, "Africa and South America have almost 2 billion people and the population is continuously growing. The problem is that all the trade on these continents is held by the Americans and the British. Russia in turn not owning its own transatlantic trade corridors. If it did trade, the whole economy was nullified by commissions and levies in favor of London and Washington. Ports, Insurance, fracking, and warehouses had to be paid for exorbitantly. On the other hand, he who owns the trade routes is the one who orders the music. By the way, the appearance of our military in Africa a few years ago is nothing but the beginning of the formation of a Russian trade corridor from the Baltic to the Atlantic. Russia is rapidly preparing an African core that will multiply our country's influence in Africa. A significant portion of the core is already ready and performing tasks. This corridor actually consists of two parts. The first is the north-south trade route, what is now being launched with Iran, and the second part through the African Sahel from the shores of the Red Sea to the Atlantic. The distance across the continent is between 3,900 and 4,500 kilometers, depending on the route chosen. And most importantly, it is the shortest route from the Middle East to the Atlantic. And it will be a multimodal corridor, which will be joined by BRICS countries, countries of the Middle East and African countries with a total population of over 4 billion people. The project is global and very serious. Just realize the magnitude of it. If it succeeds, Russia with BRICS will own two strategic multimodal corridors in the south and north of the planet, with a combined market of several billion people. No one else has that. There's no doubt we'll be thwarted. That is why Russia is building a military fleet, especially a submarine fleet, at a rapid pace. Any trade corridors need to be defended, and without a fleet, that can't be done. Here's a rough itinerary from the shores of the Baltic to Latin America. These are the interesting conclusions one comes to when one begins to look broadly at the seemingly purely local decision to build a corridor for Ethiopia to the shores of Somaliland on the Indian Ocean. If we go to this, we will see that in Latin America, in Kiev, Kirov, to phrase a famous anecdote, one can notice with mixed feelings of surprise and admiration. It's a hell of a year to start.